Great to see everyone here this morning. If you brought your Bibles or you have your Bibles on your phone, invite everyone to open them to Luke chapter 9. That's where we're going to be camping out this morning. If you're at home, and same thing, invite you to turn to Luke chapter 9. Also in your bulletins this morning, I invite you to please pull out your message notes called Sharing a Meal with Jesus. Today we're going to be talking about Jesus feeding the 5,000. And just sort of a reminder of where we're at, where we're going, what we're all about here in our message series. We're looking at 7 meals that Jesus shares with people throughout the Gospel of Luke. There's 7 meals. There's actually 9, but 2 is just sort of makes a kind of a casual nod to. But there's 7 main meals that Jesus shares with people, and we're looking at that and we're trying to see, well, what can we learn about our own life, our own journey from these meals that Jesus shares. And today we're going to look, I'm going to be up front, I'm not, no curveballs here, I'm going to tell you right up front, there's 3 lessons I want us to take away today. So I'll point them out as we go along, but 3 big lessons I really want to share with you. The springboard for my message series, Sharing a Meal with Jesus, has nothing to do with Luke. It's actually from the last book in the Bible. And Jesus says this in Revelation chapter 3, verse 20. He says, "Look, I stand and knock. I stand at the door and knock. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and share a meal together as friends." And we've mentioned this last week, and that is, back in first century Palestine, and the same today, sharing a meal is one of the ways that we cement relationships. We can have lots of casual friendships, but it's something different when you come together and you sit down and you share a meal. And last week, you might remember, I said, my first date with Sandy was at Oregano's. I still remember what we had for dinner. And throughout life, when you meet someone and you have a friend and your friendship grows, one of the things you do is say, hey, let's go out, let's grab a bite to eat. And food becomes such an important part of our life. So many times when a baby is baptized, afterwards, people gather at the person's home and they have Swedish meatballs and mashed potatoes and they have a meal together. People get married, and what do? They have a reception that is really circled and centered around food. When a person dies, they come to the church, they celebrate their life and their new life, and what do? Then they go back to someone's house and they have a meal. They eat. From the beginning to the end, food is such an important part of our life. And so today we're looking at Jesus feeding the 5,000. I want to just share a couple things about this with you. Number one, that you might find this surprising, but in the 4 Gospels, there's only 2 things that are mentioned in every single Gospel. Did you know that? The one you can guess. Holy Week, right? Basically Good Friday and Easter Sunday is mentioned in every single Gospel. And Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and Easter Sunday in all 4 Gospels. The only event that's mentioned in all 4 Gospels, the feeding of the 5,000. It's quite remarkable, and it tells us something. It tells us that this event must have had some real significance. There must have been something truly important about this that all 4 gospel readers would say, wow, we need to write about this. And by the way, just so you know, when it says the feeding of the 5,000, back in first century Palestine, they would only count men. It's just the way they were, not right or wrong. It was just, they would count men. So they're not counting families, they're counting men. So you figure that there's probably more like 20 to 30,000 people following Jesus. In fact, most scholars believe that this is the biggest crowd that Jesus ever preached to at once. Even bigger than the Sermon on the Mount. This was the biggest crowd all at once hearing Jesus preach. And so that's something important to know. The other thing is, because it's mentioned in all four Gospels, there are things that are left out or included in one Gospel that's left out in the other. So to get a really full picture of what's going on here, we need to sort of stitch these four Gospels together to get a full picture of what's happening. So just a little bit of background before we begin, just to sort of set the stage for you, if you will. Just prior to this, Jesus sends out the 12 disciples, 2 by 2. And he sends them out to heal the sick and to get rid, to exorcise demons and all these things. And they have some success, some failures, but either way, they come back and they're excited and they're telling Jesus everything that happened. In the meantime, in the process of this, Jesus gets word that his very close friend and cousin, John the Baptist, has just been put to death. Okay? All of this has happened, right? All of this is going on. And so the story begins, sorry I did it this way, but if you turn in your message notes, go ahead and do that, to the last page, not the back, but the last page. You're going to see a map. It was just the easiest way for me to do this. This story begins in the city of Capernaum. Okay? This is the Sea of Galilee. We don't really have a whole thing, but if you look at the whole country of Israel, you got the Sea of Galilee. This is the nation of Galilee. This is where Jesus grew up. The Sea of Galilee is fed into by the Jordan River, where Jesus is baptized, and it goes all the way down to the Dead Sea into Jerusalem. Most of Jesus' ministry is up north, and Jesus' home base is in Capernaum. That's where he does most of his ministry out of. And Jesus basically says, hey, let's take a break, okay? That's how this whole thing begins, is with Jesus wanting to be on the break. So it begins in Bethsaida, and this is what he says in Mark 6. Jesus said, let us go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while. So they're in Bethsaida, and what he wants to do is, he wants to take his disciples just to get a break. Maybe in your life you've been like that. You've worked so hard. Life is so stressful. And every time you turn around, you're putting out another fire or something else is going on. And you're like, man, I just need to sit down and I just need to relax. So Jesus says, let's go to the other side. Okay? And he said this because there were so many people coming and going that Jesus and his disciples didn't even have a chance to eat. They're hungry. They're tired. They're dealing with John the Baptist. They're dealing with their ministry that's just starting out. So many things, and there's just people coming at them constantly. So if you're looking on a map, they go from Capernaum across the top part of the Sea of Galilee to Bethsaida. Why are they going to Bethsaida? Well, pretty simple. And that's where Simon Peter lives. Okay? And so John, the Apostle John lives out that way. People's homes are there, so they're like, let's go away from the crowds. Now, back in first century Palestine, you'd get into a boat, and unless you really had to do some deep sea fishing, you would always stick to the shore. Why? Because it's safer. So they would kind of travel to Bethsaida hugging the shoreline. It's safe, but you can also guess the problem. People sitting on the beach with their Starbucks coffees and lattes with their feet in the sand. They see a boat getting off from Capernaum, sailing the northern part of the lake, and they can figure out something. Oh, Jesus and his disciples are going somewhere. I wonder where he's going. And everybody gets up and they begin to follow Jesus. And all of a sudden, they get off the boat. And the thing about, one last thing about this map I want to show you is if you see Bethsaida, right behind Bethsaida are these large rolling hills. They're just rolling hills. They're a mountainous area that's very green, and they're just rolling hills. So Jesus says, hey, let's get away from the crowds. They start getting out, and all of a sudden the people come out, and what do the disciples get out, and what do they see? Tons of people. Hundreds of people coming towards them. More and more. They're trying to get away for a break, to relax. They just want a day off, and they're seeing more people. And what do you think the disciples' knee-jerk reaction is? It's my day off. Time out. I'm sure you got problems. I'm sure you want to hear Jesus teach. I'm sure you have people that want to be healed. But today is our sacred day off. Leave us alone. Come back tomorrow when we'll be open. That makes sense. But not for Jesus. Jesus looks and he has compassion. This is what he says. Look on your notes in Matthew chapter 6. So they left by boat for a quiet place where they could be alone. But many people recognized them and saw them leaving. And the people from many towns ran ahead along the shore and got there ahead of them. The disciples said, it's our day off. But Jesus saw the huge crowd. And as he stepped from the boat, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And so he began teaching them many things. Now, here's the first lesson I want to share with you. And that is, sometimes in our life, we plan things very well. We plan things very strategically. We know what we want to do. And lo and behold, interruptions come. Things that we didn't expect. Things that we'd rather just not deal with. And there's always a part of us that says, I'm not going to deal with this. But sometimes God's biggest blessings come during times of interruptions. Sometimes God's leading us most directly during times when there's distractions. And so one of the things that I want us to take home today is, regardless of what's going on in our life, we always need to be aware of God's presence and where God is leading. So Jesus begins to preach. He begins to preach for a long time, all day long. And I want you to notice Luke chapter 9. It says, now the day began to wear away. Jesus is teaching a long time, in other words. And the 12 came to him. Do you get this? Jesus started early on in the day. And he's preaching. So let's just, we don't really have a timetable, but let's just kind of guess. Let's say this is around 11 o'clock in the morning. And Jesus has compassion, and he begins to teach and preach. And 11 o'clock gives to 12 o'clock. And Jesus shows no sign of slowing down. He's still preaching. And 12 o'clock goes on to 1 o'clock. And Jesus is still preaching. And 1 o'clock goes to 2 o'clock. And 2 o'clock goes to 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock goes to 4 o'clock. And Luke says, now the day began to wear away. In the Greek, that could be translated, the day began to wear away. Okay? He's preaching all day long. Okay? Brunch is over. right? Restaurants have closed down brunch. Brunch is over. If it's football season, you already missed the first game. And he's still going. Preaches 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. Okay? You see what's going on. And the 12 came and said to him, send the crowds away. Why? I want you to think about the disciples. Put yourself in there with these 12 men this one day. You're hungry. You're tired. Jesus is going on a 6-hour sermon. And they're like, well, someone's got to talk to Jesus. We can't keep doing this over and over. At some point, we got to go, I'm starving. Philip, go talk to Jesus. What am I supposed to say? He's the Lord. Tell him that the people are hungry. Good one. Philip goes over, excuse me, sorry. Lord. You know, I think we're going on 6 hours. I think this is a good time to send the people home because they're hungry. You think they're hungry? You're worried about the people? Yeah, I think we need to send them home. I mean, your sermon's good. We love this whole message series that you're bringing us all together in one day. 6 sermons in one day. That's pretty good. And we're loving it. But I think it's time to send the people home. Go into the surrounding villages and countryside and find lodging and get provisions. For we're here in this desolate place. And Jesus turns around and he says this shocking thing to Philip. He says, you're concerned about the people. Yeah. You're worried that they're hungry. 6 hours, there's no one had a bite to eat yet. I think they're hungry. I think the best thing is to dismiss the service, have a last hymn, send everyone home. And then Jesus says these shocking words, but Jesus said, you feed them. You feed them. Can you imagine Philip going back and telling the other 11 that one? Going back, well, Philip, how did it go? Is he going to dismiss the crowds? Well, kind of. Did you tell him everyone's hungry? Yeah, I did. What did he say? He said, well, I think you should go feed them. What? He said, go feed them. There's 10,000 people here. Go feed them. And I want you to see this. In the middle of this account of feeding 5,000 people, in the second Sunday in Lent, there's an important lesson here about trust and faith. Now, we're still back with the 12, right? Jesus is still going. It's 6 o'clock. And he's just like, point 2 of my 10-point sermon series. And they're like, oh, what are we going to do? And they're looking out over this multitude of people, and they see this little kid somehow squeezed up to the front, and he's got a sack lunch of Long John Silver's. Hey, kid, give me your lunch. I'm not giving you my lunch. Come on, I need your lunch. You want to see Jesus? You want to meet Jesus? Yeah. Give me your lunch. They look in where they got a couple of fish sticks and 5 biscuits. You got it, right? 2 fish sticks, 5 biscuits. Well, and Bartholomew's already gnawing on one of them. What do we do? Well, I don't know. Jesus says this weird thing. He says, you feed them, but we only have 5 bread and 2 fish, they answered. Or are you expecting us to go and buy enough food for this whole crowd? Well, that's impossible. For there were 5,000 men there. And Jesus replied, tell them to sit down in groups of about 50 each. So they all sit down. Now here's the thing. And this is where you need to know a little bit of Old Testament to get this idea of what's going on. Stop, pause button. Let's go into the Old Testament. In the book, I think it's 2 Samuel, not sure, but 2 Samuel, the prophet Elisha has 100 men. And he has a loaf of bread that he prays over, and it grows, and he feeds his 100 men. So, these are good Jewish men. You know what they're thinking? I know what's going to happen. It's like when Jesus turned that water into wine. He's going to pray over this bread. The food trucks are going to come in. Every single food truck throughout, Capernaum and Bethsaida are going to show up, and we'll all have a nice buffet. And Jesus prays, and he breaks the bread. And what does he do? He gives it to them. He says, okay, now you pass this out. Now there's Peter with his little piece of bread in his hand. And he's got these groups of 50 he's got to feed along with the other 11. Can you imagine what he's thinking? The bread didn't grow like I thought. Here, take a little bite. Take a little bite. What would you say? Take a big bite? Take a little bite. Take a little bite. Take a little bite. What are you, a glutton? Take a little bite. Not a big bite, just a little one. And he's thinking, I'm never going to get through 5 people, and my bread's going to be gone. And all of a sudden, something amazing happens. Peter, Bartholomew, Philip, Andrew, John, James, they look down at their bread, and there's more of it. Well, I guess you could take a little bit bigger piece. Where's the glutton? Give him another piece. And all of a sudden it keeps going. And all of a sudden the fish keeps going. And all of a sudden these men are looking out at these multitudes of people over these rolling hills. And all of a sudden they're all eating. Lesson number 2 I want you to take home today. Are you ready? The miracle did not happen in the master's hands, but in the disciples' hands. There's a lesson in that because Jesus uses the closest willing hands. And so many times we miss miracles. You know why? Because we don't think they're miracles at all. We think they're coincidences. Because God doesn't come down and zap things, and food trucks don't show up. He gives each disciple some bread and a fish and say, pass it out. And as they're passing it out, it just goes on and on and on. Wow, how did that happen? When you're praying for a miracle, know that God's going to deliver. It just might not be the way you think. And when it happens, you're going to look back and say, well, was that just a miracle or just someone coming into my life I didn't expect? It's a miracle. But miracles generally don't happen in the master's hands. They happen in the disciples' hands, in your hands. Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, looked up at heaven, blessed them. And then breaking the loaves into pieces, he kept giving the bread and fish to the disciples so they could distribute it to the people. And they all ate as much as they wanted. And afterwards, the disciples picked up the 12 baskets full. In other words, his miracle was so great that they all had enough. I mean, think about that. Think about 10,000 people and a Long John Silver's lunch, little Lunchables, and thinking this is going to feed everyone. And all of a sudden, everyone has more than enough. But that's the way God works. The third lesson I want you to take home today isn't found in the Gospel of Luke. It's found in the Gospel of John, because Luke kind of ends it right here. Mark ends it right here. Matthew ends it here. The interesting thing is when you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and they pick up again, you can tell we're missing something. Feeding the 5,000 happens, something else happens, and there's a time gap, and we don't know, but I'm guessing what happened was John came by about 50 years later when he wrote his gospel and said, I think I need to fill in the hole here. So what happens during John's part of the gospel? Well, after Jesus fed the 5,000, after they were all done, after he finished his 6-hour sermon, after he healed people, he finally sent them home. And John tells us something really interesting here. John tells us that after they had their fill, they thought, wow, we like this. We like not having to go to Fry's or Walmart. And they tried to make Jesus king by force. And Jesus was going to be a king, just not the king that they thought. They thought that he was going to come into Jerusalem and there was going to be his coronation, and really he was going there to be crucified. Because that was his kingdom, a kingdom of heaven. And so Jesus says, you know what, get back in that boat and go back to the other side, go back to Capernaum where we started. And I'm going to go up on the mountainside and pray by myself. And the next day, Jesus walks on the Sea of Galilee back to the other side. And all the people, the group of people, it's now morning. And they're like, well, where's Jesus? His disciples are here. Where's Jesus? We saw the disciples' boat come in last night, but no Jesus. Where is he? First thing in the morning, they're on the board. They're on the shore again with their lattes. No Jesus boat. Next thing they'd see him on the shore. Now here's the interesting thing I want you to know. Is they ask him this really interesting question. They say, in John chapter 6, this is what they said. They found him on the other side of the lake, and they asked, Rabbi, when did you get here? Do you think that's the question they really wanted to know? What was the question? How? How did you get here? We were watching for the boats. We didn't see you on the boat. But I want you to know what they're doing. They're looking for Jesus not because he's the Son of God, but they're looking for him because what they really want is Jesus to be a vending machine. And here's the thing. It's always better to ask questions than to ask for things. My good friend Kurt Parks gave me this great book called 25 Questions to Ask. And it talks about the importance of questions. A few years ago, I read this really neat article about this guy named Ben. He was a 21, 22-year-old guy. He was a musician in Baltimore. And one day, Ben was walking home. He just went to go get a cup of coffee. He was walking home. He's walking near his house, and walking the other way was this older gentleman, thin, kind of wearing this windbreaker, dressed not bad, but not great, kind of disheveled. He was walking down the street. They were kind of walking towards each other, when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, at least the article says, the skies opened up. Thunder starts to drizzle, but you can hear the thunder going, starting to rain harder, and Ben's almost home. And this old man comes up, I don't know, he's not real old, but older, comes up, and he says, excuse me, he goes, I'm staying here in Baltimore at this hotel. Earlier this morning, I went for a walk, and I left my cell phone at home. And do you know how it looks like it's going to rain? And I lost my way. Can you tell me how to get back to this hotel, this Marriott hotel? And Ben says, well, I got to tell you, you're about 5 miles away. It's going to be a good hike, and it looks like it's about to rain. He goes, you know what? He goes, I live right here. He goes, how about if I just drive you to your hotel? And this old stranger says, yeah, okay, I could do that. They get into the car, and they're driving along, and the old stranger says to this young guy, he goes, well, what do you do for a living? Are you in college, or what do you do? He goes, no. He goes, I'm a musician. He goes, I play guitar. I'm in this band. I write my own music, and we're just, we kind of bounce from bar to bar and stuff like that. And he goes, that's really interesting. He goes, old guy goes, you know what? He goes, I'm a musician too. The guy goes, really? I didn't know that. Anything I've heard of? Who are you? He goes, oh, my name is Bob Dylan. He goes, I thought you looked familiar. He goes, he had a hat on. I couldn't tell. Bob Dylan says, I'll tell you what. There's a Denny's right here. How about we go and grab a cup of coffee? My treat. So Bob Dylan and Ben pull into this Denny's. And for 2 hours, they have this conversation where Ben, in his article, says he's just asking Bob Dylan tons of questions about writing music, writing lyrics, recording, how he got his start. After about 2 hours, Ben takes Bob Dylan back to the hotel. And by the time Bob Dylan is getting out of the car, his security guards are frantic, and they're running to the car. And Bob turns around and says to Ben, he says this really important question. You ready for this? He says, thanks for the conversation. Thanks for the drive. He goes, is there anything I can do for you? And Ben says, you've done enough. I got to visit with you and ask you every question in my mind. That's more than enough. They shook hands, and that was it, and Ben wrote this article. Can you imagine if Ben said, you know what, Bob? There is something you can do. Your new CD, can you hook me up with that? That sort of would have cheapened their whole visit, wouldn't it? Instead, he just asked questions. Maybe you've known someone who's said this. I used to go to church, but I gave it up because I just didn't get anything out of it. You ever know anyone said anything like that? I used to read the Bible, but I just didn't get anything out of it. If you've ever heard someone say that, if you've said that, the fact of the matter is you still don't understand what it is. See, Jesus says, I tell you the truth. You want to be with me because I fed you, not because you understood the miraculous signs. Lesson number 3. These men and women were standing on the shore of Galilee, talking to God incarnate. And they were too interested in their stomach to look at Jesus. They were too interested in what I could get than to what Jesus wanted to give them. And sometimes we go through life just like that. We're more interested in what we can get, like, Jesus, I want this, and I'm going to put my quarter in and pull the slot machine and it's going to come out, rather than all the things Jesus says. He later goes on to say, you know what? You want treasures here on earth that moths are going to destroy, but instead you should be wanting treasures in heaven. They'll be there forever. And Jesus finishes by saying, I'm going to give you something that no one else can give you if you open your heart to me. And that is, I can give you eternal life. And I can make you so you'll never hunger again and never thirst again. And I can give you peace. And I can bring about understanding. So that's the third thing. The third lesson is, look to Jesus, not to what he gives us, not to things of this world. The feeding of the 5,000. Jesus teaches us a lot. He teaches us to listen for God's leading. He teaches us that miracles happen in our hands more often than out of the sky. And number 3, to look to Jesus, not to our own appetite. Amen. Let us rise to confess our Holy Spirit-given faith together in the words of the Apostles' Creed.